12 football players boarded a school bus in 2003 and were never seen again. For 20 years, their disappearance haunted a town with no leads, no bus, no goodbyes. But when a forgotten storage unit was opened, the truth finally came screaming out. You won't want to miss this story. But before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a video like this one. The day started with cleats tapping against concrete and helmet decals freshly shined, the Franklin High Lions ready for what should have been just another away game in a season full of promise. The team bus pulled out of the school parking lot at 3:42 p.m. 12 players crammed into 2 long rows, Coach Darnell up front with a clipboard and cooler. The substitute driver, an unfamiliar man with sunglasses and a quiet demeanor behind the wheel. Parents waved. Teachers stood by the windows. No one imagined it would be the last time they'd see any of them. The bus was last seen on Highway 76. Caught on a grainy gas station camera just outside of Wolf Hollow, where they stopped briefly to refuel and buy snacks. A few boys mugged for the security lens, holding up energy drinks and mouth guards. Everything seemed normal, but they never made it to the game. No tire tracks, no wreckage, no sign of a crash or storm. One minute, they existed, and the next, they were ghosts. When the other team called to ask where Franklin High was, administrators assumed a delay, a detour, a flat tire maybe. By nightfall, panic settled in like fog across the valley. Helicopters were dispatched, drones combed the surrounding forests, and parents gathered at the school, some still clutching their sons' forgotten water bottles. Roads were searched, lakes dragged, ditches combed. The bus's GPS had been disconnected before departure. No one knew who approved the last-minute driver change, only that their usual driver, a man named Elkins, had called in sick and never followed up. The substitute had signed in using the name R. Morris, but no such employee existed on any district payroll. The school's transportation office said the request came from Coach Darnell himself, but there was no email, no written note, only a voicemail that mysteriously disappeared from the system the next morning. For weeks, the missing team was headline news. Then a month passed. Then a year. Rumors festered: abduction, government cover-up, cults in the canyon. Every new theory made the mystery crueler, more surreal. No answers, just lockers left untouched, gear bags unclaimed, and a scoreboard permanently stuck at 0. The Franklin Lions were never officially declared dead. Their families refused to hold funerals. The town held on to hope like it was oxygen. But the ache that followed wasn't the sharp kind that comes with loss. It was the slow suffocation of not knowing. And for 20 years, that silence grew, until someone missed a payment on a storage unit. They gathered beneath the Friday night lights, not to cheer, but to wait mothers gripping thermoses of untouched coffee, fathers pacing the track with arms folded too tight. The scoreboard still blinked home, as if the Lions were just running late, as if the low hum of tension in the air might crack open into joy at any moment. But as 7 o'clock became 9 o'clock, and the team bus still hadn't appeared over the hill, something heavy began to press against every rib cage in the bleachers. Some clung to logic, maybe a flat tire, a wrong turn, a miscommunication. Others scoured their phones, refreshing news pages and calling highways patrol. Marianne Bell, whose son Isaiah was the starting quarterback, stood silent at the entrance gate, staring down the dark road like it might deliver her boy if she just stared hard enough. Coach Darnell's wife arrived with a list of the team roster and began phoning parents' voice shaking, but still too calm, too hopeful. But by midnight, the truth settled in like ash. No calls, no texts, no traffic reports. A highway patrol officer finally muttered the words no one was ready to process. They're not on the route anymore." Panic moved like wind through the crowd. Some rushed home to check if the boys had returned by other means. Others drove the route themselves, headlights sweeping ditches and overpasses. By morning, the town became a search grid. Roadblocks sprung up at canyon mouths. Volunteers walked shoulder to shoulder through the chaparral, and helicopters combed the air above with spotlights that illuminated nothing but rock and dust. News vans arrived by sundown, broadcasting tears and theories in equal measure. Some whispered about kidnappings, others blamed the school district. There were rumors of escaped convicts, old cult rumors, even strange lights seen near Red Hollow the night before. But the strangest thing of all was the absence: no tire marks, no debris, not a single cleat or scrap of jersey fabric. It was as if the bus had been swallowed by the earth. And in a way, it had into a kind of collective trauma where hope had to wear armor just to survive. The stadium was locked, then reopened, then locked again. Parents slept in cars, stared out windows, and kept the porch light on long after sunrise. Something had broken loose in Franklin, not just the team, but the very trust in the ground beneath their feet. The footage was grainy, time-stamped 5:37 p.m., and captured the Franklin High team loading back onto their bus at a remote fuel stop off Highway 27, a place where the sky felt too wide, and even the wind seemed to whisper secrets. The players joked, nudged each other, bought candy bars and energy drinks, their red and white jackets flashing like blood against concrete. Coach Darnell was the last aboard, tapping the driver's shoulder as he climbed the steps, and then the door folded shut with a sigh. That was the last anyone ever saw of them. Authorities combed the stop for clues, interviewed the station clerk, pulled receipts, scanned the area with dogs and drones. But when they traced the expected route down the winding stretch through Sand Basin and on to Route 41, they hit a wall. No eyewitnesses, no sightings. No skid marks, no broken guardrails, no GPS pings or cell signals, just empty highway and silence. It was as if the road had opened its jaws and swallowed the bus whole, leaving behind no bones, no wreckage, just ghosts in Letterman jackets and families gnawed by unanswered prayers. Investigators considered detours, runaway theories, mechanical failure, even driver intoxication, but nothing held. The driver had no history of substance abuse. The bus was a newer model, fitted with a transponder that never once pinged again after that fuel stop. Highway 27 became something else that year, a place parents wouldn't drive after dark, a stretch of pavement that hummed with absence. Truckers who'd once pulled over for naps, they now cruised straight through. And on the anniversary each year, someone always left 13 white ribbons tied to the station's fence, 12 for the boys, 1 for the coach. Journalists speculated about sinkholes, and a fringe blogger insisted the bus had been hijacked by a doomsday cult. But most people just stared at the map and asked themselves the same maddening question: how does a 20,000-pound vehicle vanish on a clear day without a trace? Theories piled up like dead leaves, but none filled the space the bus had left behind. It wasn't just a disappearance, it was a rupture, a gap in reality that logic couldn't patch. In the sheriff's office, a bulletin board still bore the route highlighted in yellow, the final stop circled in red, and a post-it that read, "Next check, Ariel again?" But the sky never answered. The road just kept stretching forward, indifferent, blank as grief. It was buried in a backup server, mislabeled, and nearly erased an old voicemail file rediscovered during a routine audit by the cell carrier's legal team. When authorities played it, time froze. Coach Darnell's voice came through, tight with unease, riding the edge of a whisper and a warning. "We took a wrong turn," he said. "I think we're off route." "Something's not right out here," In the background, you could hear the low murmur of teenage voices laughing, then quieting, then one boy asking, "Coach, was that a fence we passed?" The tone wasn't panic yet, but it held the weight of someone realizing too late they'd crossed an invisible line. A metallic rattle followed like the sound of the bus rolling over gravel that didn't belong on any highway. Then static, a breath. A sudden thud, sharp and final, followed by what sounded like the phone hitting the floor, and then nothing, not even the usual end of call beep. The timestamp placed the message just 16 minutes after the bus left the fuel stop on a stretch of highway so empty you could drive an hour without seeing another soul. Investigators replayed the voicemail dozens of times, clinging to background noises like lifelines, the hum of tires, the rustle of nylon warm-ups, the faint echo that suggested they might have passed through a tunnel or underpass not listed on any map. But none of it made sense. There was no tunnel, no fork in the road where a bus could take a wrong turn and not be noticed. Some experts said the static indicated a drop in cell service. Others said it sounded like interference, like something intentional. For the families, though, the tape was proof. Proof that the boys hadn't run away, that the coach hadn't abandoned them, that something happened, something violent, something real. Marianne Choi, whose son Tyler had been the team's wide receiver, said listening to the message felt like standing outside a locked door you'll never open. The voicemail was played at the next school vigil, broadcast through tear-streaked speakers across the football field where the boys had practiced their final drills. It became a memorial and a mystery wrapped into one. 13 names, one call, and a single chilling sentence echoing louder with each passing year. Something's not right out here. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a breadcrumb. A ghost knocking once from the other side of a radio tower, asking, pleading to be followed. It started as a footnote in an otherwise mundane personnel report, a substitution slip filed the morning of the trip. The regular driver, Bill Hannigan, called in with flu symptoms, leaving the district scrambling to find a replacement for the Franklin High varsity team's away game. A name was jotted in ink, slightly smudged, R. Morris. No first name, no credentials. The dispatcher on duty said the sub had shown up early, clipboard in hand, seeming prepared and professional. But when investigators pulled the employee roster, there was no R. Morris, past or present on file. Not in transportation, not in any department. No license record, no background check, no payroll, just a signature and a missing bus full of boys. The dispatcher, a woman named Kayla Brinks, broke down in tears during questioning. She remembered the man, clearly tall, late 50s, calm voice, sunglasses that never came off even inside the office. "He said he'd subbed before," she whispered. "I believed him." Security footage from the depot confirmed his presence, though his face remained frustratingly obscured, one angle catching only the back of a baseball cap, another blocked by glare. He walked with a slight limp and carried a thermos. Beyond that, he was a ghost. Someone, somewhere, had allowed this man to drive off with 13 lives, and no one could say how or why. Theories snowballed. A disgruntled ex-employee, a drifter, someone impersonating staff. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. No one had verified him. The district had been understaffed, rushing to avoid cancelling the game, and standard protocol slipped. In a filing cabinet at the transportation office, beneath forms never scanned, authorities found the sub-request written hastily in pencil, assigned by a temp staffer on her second week. She remembered him smiling and saying, "Don't worry, I've done this run before." That was all. Just a smile, and a lie that led to silence. For the parents, the revelation hit like a second disappearance, this time of responsibility, of trust. How does a man with no name steer a bus off the map? Coach Darnell had trusted him. The boys had boarded without question, and somewhere along that route, R. Morris became the last adult to see them alive. The photo of the clipboard, left behind on the depot counter, now sat beneath glass at the town library, a memorial of ink, absence, and the sharpest kind of human error. The kind that wears a smile and leaves no footprints. The 2004 Franklin High yearbook opens like any other class portraits, club spreads, senior quotes, scrawled in uneven Sharpie ink, but near the middle, beneath the sports section, sits a page of absence. No photo of the varsity football team, no roster, no action shots under Friday night lights. Just a grainy image of the stadium bleachers, empty and dusk-lit, with a caption that reads simply, "In memory." It was the year the yearbook staff couldn't find words big enough to fill what was lost. 12 players, a coach, and a driver who wasn't real gone, with no confirmed destination, no recovered wreckage, no graves. The school tried to move on. They retired the team's jersey numbers, left the locker room untouched, even painted the field gates shut. But memory doesn't obey locks and gestures. Survivors from that era speak of a quiet that followed them through the hallways like a fog, a weight that settled over everything without announcement. Teachers avoided the topic. Students whispered and speculated, but never loudly. One girl said she kept looking over her shoulder in class, half expecting one of the missing boys to walk in late, tossing an apology. Another swore she could still hear cleats on tile long after practice had been cancelled for good. The school hired grief counselors, but few students attended. They didn't want words, they wanted their teammates back. What's harder than mourning the dead is mourning the undefined. And in Franklin, the undefined became ritual. Candles on anniversary dates. Silence before kickoff at rival schools. A memorial bench that cracked in two during a storm but was never repaired. Class photos from that year are smaller, with space where people should have stood. Prom photos show girls clinging to corsages with no partners. And every time a new student asked about the blank page in the yearbook, an older one would just say, "That's the team that never came home." Some would cry, most didn't, but no one joked. A decade later, even as new generations filtered through the halls, that page remained unchanged, photocopied, unaltered, left in reverent stillness by yearbook editors who weren't even alive when it happened. As if the silence itself had become tradition, a record of what wasn't there. A whole chapter in school history built not on achievement or celebration, but on the stubborn, echoing grief of what vanished between fuel stops and never touched home again. In the summer of 2023, a storage facility manager named Owen Bell was clearing out units that had gone unpaid routine work, mostly boxes of old tax records, broken furniture, the usual detritus of forgotten lives. But Unit 117 struck him as odd the moment he unlocked it. Dust lay thicker than usual, undisturbed. The rental records traced back to a name that didn't match any local address, and when Owen ran it through the system, it flagged as untraceable. Whoever had rented it had done so in cash, and they'd done it religiously every month for exactly 20 years. Until now. The payment, always dropped in the after-hours box, hadn't come. Inside, amid cobwebs and rusted shelving, stood a single object, a metal chest the size of a cooler, edges dented, hinges corroded to the color of dried blood. It was sealed with a padlock whose key no one could find. Owen hesitated. Most storage finds turned up nothing worse than mold or mice, but this chest radiated something else. Weight. History. Dread. He called his supervisor, who gave a shrug and a, "Just cut it open." And when the bolt cutters snapped through the lock with a sharp crack, it felt Owen would later say like cracking open a tomb. The lid groaned on its hinges. Inside, layers of plastic sheeting folded with surgical care. Beneath them, a tangle of fabric, old and stiff. jerseys. Red and white, stained, with names still visible, and shoes. Cleats caked with reddish soil, laces still tied. At the bottom lay a notebook, warped and damp, its pages curling with time. The first page bore a name. Coach Darnell. Owen backed away. He called police. Within hours, the facility was taped off. Forensic teams moved in. News vans followed. What had been just another unit of unpaid space now held the story Franklin had been denied for 2 decades. Parents started arriving hesitantly, tearfully. Some didn't speak. Others wept openly. They weren't told much at first, only that personal effects had been found, possibly linked to the missing team. And just like that, the silence of 20 years cracked open like a pressure valve. The rusted chest, once hidden in a room no one noticed, now stood at the center of a reopened case. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was more than anyone had dared hope for in years. A signal, a whisper from the past saying, "Keep digging. You're close now." The moment authorities opened the rusted chest, the temperature in the storage unit seemed to drop not in degrees, but in mood, in weight, in the hush that fell across the concrete floor like a blanket soaked in old grief. Gloves on, flashlights aimed, the forensics team began lifting items with the reverence usually reserved for gravesites. At the top was a team playbook, dog-eared, its corners frayed with use. The cover bore the Franklin High emblem, now faded, and inside were scribbled notations, adjusted plays, strategy marks, and what appeared to be frantic additions written in red ink that wasn't part of any school colors. Beneath that lay uniforms. Franklin's red and silver jerseys, folded tight and pressed flat. Each bore a name: Carter, Ellis, Nung, Brooks. Numbers like gravestones. Number 72 had a tear along the shoulder seam, a patch of something dark along the hem. Then came the equipment cleats, scuffed and still carrying the dust of a field long lost, a mouthguard melted oddly along one edge, and several laminated ID tags from a fuel stop an hour east of Franklin. But it was what lay at the bottom that made the youngest officer step out to vomit behind the building. A clear evidence bag, sealed with tape nearly fossilized, held an SD card. The label was handwritten, crooked, game film, do not erase. No year, no team name, just that warning, do not erase. The card was rushed to the lab, priority status, and the moment it was inserted into a reader, technicians found a single file dated the 17th of October, 2003, the same night the team disappeared. The footage, corrupted but partially viewable, showed the team on the bus, jerseys untucked, helmets on laps, laughter, jokes. A handheld camera panned aisle to aisle. Coach Darnell appeared at the front, holding a map, pointing out something through the windshield. Then static, a blur. And suddenly, the screen froze on a single frame. The driver's eyes reflected in the rearview mirror, wide, not focused on the road, but locked on the camera, like he knew it was the last thing anyone would see. Experts tried to enhance the clip, isolate the background, reconstruct the sequence, but it was fragmented. Still, it was something real. For the first time in 20 years, the town had proof the boys had made it further than anyone thought. The chest wasn't just a container of things. It was a message in rusted metal and sealed fabric. The past hadn't been buried. It had been waiting. The footage plays like a time capsule cracked open too late to save anyone, but just in time to haunt the living. At first, it's almost tender boys laughing, tossing popcorn, one of them beatboxing, while another raps off-key into the camera. The image is grainy, the sound crackling with wind through half-open windows, and yet It captures something real, teenage joy, unaware of what's coming. A wide shot shows rows of padded seats, cleats resting on duffel bags, shoulder pads wedged under chins. Coach Darnell stands briefly, points out a mountain ridge through the windshield, says something about getting back on track. Then, the camera swings to the aisle, and that's when everything shifts. The engine revs louder than it should. The cabin lights flicker. Someone jokes, "Did we just hit something?" But no one laughs. At the front of the bus, a figure appears, not the driver, not anyone the boys seem to recognize. The camera zooms slightly, jostling as it tries to steady, but the image never gets fully clear. What is clear is the reaction. One player shouts something, possibly, "Who's that?" Another grabs his teammate's arm. The noise explodes into overlapping voices, confusion turning to fear in real time. Then the first scream. Not just startled, but guttural, primal, the kind of sound that tells the body to run even when there's nowhere to go. The lens jerks wildly. A hand covers it, maybe trying to hide, maybe trying to stop the recording altogether, but the footage keeps rolling. A hard thud, like something heavy hitting metal. Then, silence. And it's the silence that does the most damage. 30 full seconds of darkness and quiet, save for the faint whine of the bus engine still idling. Then the image snaps back on, for just a moment. A face, inches from the camera, eyes wild and disoriented. Blood on the cheek. The boy opens his mouth to speak, but the screen freezes. The file ends there. Forensics teams try to restore the final frames, but most of the data is unrecoverable. What remains is handed to the families in a sealed report. Some refuse to watch. Others do, and wish they hadn't. But the town can no longer pretend. The myth of a team swallowed by bad roads or broken brakes is gone. They were taken, on purpose, on camera, and someone wanted it saved. Not just as evidence, but as a warning, buried in pixels and terror. The video's metadata reveals more than just coordinates. It uncovers a deliberate detour. Investigators trace the file's origin to a long-abandoned military installation buried deep in the canyons, 15 miles off the football team's intended route. The site, known on paper as Echo Point Outpost, had been decommissioned in 1987, its purpose scrubbed clean from public records. But satellite imaging shows a weathered access road, half swallowed by desert brush, snaking toward a chain-link fence, now sagging under rust and time. A team arrives under moonlight, flashlights sweeping through broken gates and graffiti-tagged walls. What they find is not just decay, but the unmistakable signs of recent activity. Fresh tire tracks mar the dust. A lock on a side building is newer than the rest. Inside, the air is dry and stale, but not undisturbed. There are remnants of movement carts leaned against the wall, medical gloves, a cracked lantern with a burned-out bulb. A trapdoor, camouflaged beneath loose tiling, leads to a basement chamber lined with faded insulation. In the center, a steel cage, empty now, but with markings on the concrete scrapes from cleats, dark stains that test positive for blood. On one wall, scratched letters spell out a list of numbers matching jersey assignments. A nearby shelf holds artifacts almost too normal to be sinister: water bottles, protein bars, a folded towel bearing the Franklin Falcons logo. The weight of it all presses in on the officers. This place had not just seen the team, it had held them temporarily. Somewhere between way station and prison. A faded Polaroid tucked behind a pipe reveals 12 boys seated against a wall, eyes wide, mouths gagged. Coach Darnell is visible in the background, unconscious or worse. The back of the photo reads, "Transport complete. Burn after viewing." But it never was. Instead, It sat forgotten, or waiting until now. The horror settles in like dust on old boots. This wasn't a freak disappearance. It was orchestrated, professional, hidden in plain sight through layers of lost history and silence. The defunct site becomes an active crime scene overnight. Forensic teams comb every inch, while detectives draft timelines that span decades. Somewhere, someone kept this place alive long after it died on paper. And now, with the evidence unearthed and the past clawing its way into the present, the question becomes less about where the boys were taken and more about why. The truth is no longer a ghost. It's rooted in concrete, cables, and cold planning. Beneath the barracks' rotted floorboards, where mildew clung to every breath and the concrete walls wept with condensation, a trapdoor is discovered, not large but reinforced and sealed tight with a rusted padlock that seemed too deliberate to be forgotten. When police force it open, the air that escapes is dry and hollow, like a breath held far too long. A narrow ladder leads down into a low-ceilinged crawl space, barely lit by the officers' flashlights, and there, sprawled in heartbreaking silence, are the final answers the town of Franklin had feared and prayed against for 2 decades. Bones, some still clothed in tattered jerseys, cleats fused with dust and time, faded helmets stacked like afterthoughts. Some of the gear bears names, barely legible. Rico, Deshawn, Tommy. It doesn't take long for the forensic team to begin confirming what their eyes already screamed: these are the boys. All 12. The missing team. Their final huddle not beneath Friday night lights, but in this lightless crypt beneath a forgotten war facility. Time has not been kind. Some of the remains show signs of injury. A few have broken fingers, as if clawing, as if they'd fought against the dark. But there are no bullet holes, no obvious cause of death, just lifeless stillness, sealed away and abandoned like inconvenient evidence. The helmets, now brittle, are arranged oddly, almost ceremonially, facing one direction, toward the wall, toward a small hand-drawn chalk symbol no one immediately recognizes. The medical examiner's voice cracks as he confirms identity after identity. Parents are called. Some collapse, some curse, some go silent. The ache that had lived in Franklin like a dormant volcano has finally erupted, ash coating every corner of the community. What started as a football trip ended here, in this place that should never have existed, buried beneath bureaucratic oversight and something colder, intent. The discovery sends shockwaves through state and national news. The FBI takes over. Satellite imagery is reanalyzed. Names resurface. A motive begins to uncoil, slow and mean. But in this moment, standing in that room where the air tastes like grief and dust, the officers understand something ancient. That closure is a brutal gift. These boys weren't lost. They were hidden. Forgotten by design. Their last game, their last laugh, their last fight. It all ended here, beneath the floor, beneath the truth. And now, at long last, the silence begins to crack. The locker beneath the floor has been opened, and the story it tells is only just beginning. When the forensic team lifted partial fingerprints from the rusted frame of the recovered bus footage and compared them against federal databases, the match arrived with a chill. Richard Morin, not a school employee, not a licensed driver, not even a civilian with a clean record, but a former patient from a now defunct psychiatric facility in northern Nevada, committed in the late 82nd after a series of delusions involving youth, athletic teams, and military conspiracies. His medical files, once sealed, were pried open like an old wound. The contents were disturbing. Morin believed local sports teams were part of covert government trials, subjects in some imagined experiment involving obedience, loyalty, and silence. He'd written manifestos. filled with diagrams and crude sketches of football fields marked with military symbols, bus routes reimagined as containment paths. He'd fixated on Franklin High after the team made local headlines the week before the disappearance, calling them a perfect unit. His discharge paperwork was incomplete. No address, no job placement, no contact logs after 1999. Somehow, Morin had slipped through the cracks, shed his diagnosis, and reinvented himself as R. Morris, blending into the gig economy, just long enough to sign onto the school district's emergency transport list. No red flags, no social security cross-check. A paper ghost. Investigators traced rental agreements, storage payments, and grainy ATM footage from the early 2000s. In one frame, Morin appears thin, hollow-eyed, wearing a Franklin Falcons cap and holding a duffel bag with school logos likely stolen, possibly gifted by a student who never made it home. A tattered journal found in the same storage unit as the chest revealed chilling entries. Day 1 test group intact. Coach suspicious, eliminated vocal threat. Subjects adapting to silence. It read less like a confession and more like a report written for an imagined superior. What began as a missing persons case had unraveled into something more complex, a collision of obsession, system failure, and a madness so quiet it passed for ordinary. Law enforcement scoured the region for Morin's last known location, but the trail had gone cold after 2005. Some believe he died alone in the desert. Others believe he never left. But what was undeniable now was that the smiling substitute who'd driven away with a team of boys had been an imposter all along, one whose sickness had been dismissed until it swallowed a town whole. The name Richard Morin would never again be spoken without a shiver. Inside a battered waterproof case, tucked beneath the layers of uniforms and old cleats, investigators found the final thread of Richard Morin's unraveling mind, a leather-bound journal, warped by age and water. Its pages yellowed, but meticulously filled with tight, obsessive handwriting. The first entries were observational, almost clinical, like the notes of a man preparing a study. Dates, player names, behaviors, adjustments to routine. But as the pages turned, something darker bled through. He referred to the Franklin players, not by name, but by number. Subject 3 showed resistance. Subject 7 needs isolation. The language became ritualistic, the tone reverent. This team, he wrote, is unlike the last. Obedient, pure. Still untainted by the disease of outside influence. Morin believed he was saving them from corruption, from modern decay, from their own ambitions. He spoke of discipline as salvation, of silence as proof of loyalty. The test begins in stillness, he scribbled. Only when the noise dies do they learn to listen. Pages described drills that weren't physical, but psychological. Prolonged darkness, forced routines, isolation from the contaminated, a term he never defined but used frequently. Morin viewed himself not as captor, but as coach, father, redeemer. One haunting passage described a moment when one of the boys begged to go home. He cried like a broken instrument, Morin wrote. But I reminded him, home is where they control you. Here you are free to obey. The journal bore no remorse, no guilt, only frustration when subjects failed the program. One name, Coach Darnell, appeared with fury. He interfered. He undermined the silence. He had to be removed. The entry stopped there, but a faint brown smear across the margin made its own statement. Toward the final pages, the writing grew erratic, looping and slanted, with sketches of playbooks that looked more like trap diagrams. Arrows pointed nowhere, circles enclosed nothing. The last sentence read, I have given them stillness. I have built them a field, untouched by time. Then nothing. No signature, no date, just silence pressed into paper. For law enforcement, it was the closest thing to a motive. For the families, it was horror, codified. And for the town of Franklin, it was a revelation that stained every football photo still hanging in the high school halls. Morin hadn't just taken the boys, he'd rewritten their story in his own broken gospel. And now, 20 years later, that gospel had been unearthed, word by chilling word. They gathered on a cold September evening, the sun dipping behind the bleachers of Franklin High's weathered stadium as the crowd filled every seat, some holding candles, others clinging to fading photos that had lived too long on bedroom mirrors and fridge doors. For 20 years, the ceremony never happened. Grief too raw, answers too absent, hope too cruel to let go of. But now, with bones identified and a story finally told, the town could mourn properly. Rows of parents stepped forward, voices trembling as they read letters they'd written back in 2003, messages meant for sons who never came home. "I saved your seat at Thanksgiving," one mother whispered into the microphone, "just in case you made it back." Another father gripped a football in his hands the entire time, his knuckles white as he read a birthday card he never mailed. The school band didn't play. No one wanted music. The silence was louder than anything they could have composed. In that silence, the empty field below seemed to breathe, the place where the missing should have run, tackled, celebrated, cursed at referees. Instead, it was roped off, marked by 13 flags, 12 for the boys, 1 for the coach, each stitched with names that once printed jerseys, now found buried in a storage chest or rotting under a floorboard. A local pastor spoke briefly but didn't preach. He just said, "They were taken. We see them now, and we remember." No one applauded. No one needed to. The stadium lights flickered on slowly, casting a pale glow over the bleachers as if the ghosts of the lost team had finally come back to take one last look. A few old classmates placed cleats on the grass, pairing them beside folded notes and laminated programs from that final, never-played game. At the end of the night, the scoreboard lit up 0 o'clock while the crowd stood as one. No kickoff, no whistles, just a held breath, then a collective exhale. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was sacred. It was earned. And, as parents hugged, as friends wept into each other's shoulders, as teachers placed a single rose at the foot of the podium, the town of Franklin, for the first time in 2 decades, didn't feel haunted, it felt whole. Not because the pain had passed, but because the boys were no longer missing. They were finally, undeniably seen and remembered. The jerseys arrived one by one, hand-delivered in weatherproof boxes by quiet officers and caseworkers who knew better than to say closure. Inside each was a vacuum-sealed uniform, once bright with school pride, now dulled by time and soil, stitched with names that hadn't been spoken aloud at dinner tables in 20 years. Parents opened the lids with trembling hands, some collapsing into chairs, others clutching the fabric to their chests, as if the weight of memory might finally make the absence tangible. Numbers that had once echoed from loudspeakers now sat folded in silence, accompanied by a letter from the district and a certificate from the state. It didn't feel like enough. It never could. But it was something physical, something real, something to replace the empty chair at graduations and the phantom steps down the hallway. One jersey, number 18, had no family left to claim it. His mother had died 2 years after the disappearance. A stroke, they said, but everyone knew it was heartbreak. That jersey was placed in a shadow box and carried to the center of the field under the glow of the stadium lights, the same ones that had once lit up Friday night victories and teenage dreams. A maintenance worker who remembered the boy by name set it down gently at the 50-yard line, then stepped back as the town filed into the stands again, this time not for ceremony but for communion. No speeches, no news crews, just candlelight, breath visible in the autumn air, and a box holding a legacy that should have had a future. Someone played a voicemail over the speakers, Coach Darnell's final message. "We took a wrong turn," followed by static. It crackled across the field like a confession. The scoreboard was turned off. The bleachers didn't shake with cheers. But something about that quiet, shared, and solemn felt louder than anything Franklin had heard in decades. A young boy, not more than 10, walked to the edge of the field with his father and whispered, "He played here?" The father nodded. They all did, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. 2003 and 2023, standing side by side in the same breath. The jersey didn't move, but in the way it caught the wind just so, as if lifting toward the night sky, some said it felt like those boys were finally running again. Not lost, not hidden, just home.